When a country gets rich from one thing, whether it's oil, minerals, or gas, it can feel like a shortcut to prosperity. Money flows in, government spends more, and life looks stable. But what happens when that one thing stops working? Venezuela is the clearest warning story of the modern world, not because it was poor, but because it was rich and still collapsed. Just over a decade ago, Venezuela was one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. It had the world's largest proven oil reserves. The state was earning billions, and yet today, the economy is fractions of its former size. Prices once doubled in weeks, shelves emptied, millions of people left the country simply to survive. This didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. Venezuela's story isn't really about oil. It's about what happens when a country builds its entire lifestyle on one income source and never prepares for the day it shrinks. Think of a household that relies on one high-paying job. As long as that salary keeps coming, everything works. But if that income disappears and there's no savings, no backup skills, and no flexibility, collapse can be fast. This video asks a simple question, but an uncomfortable one. Which countries today are living like Venezuela did? And what warning signs should they be watching? Venezuela didn't collapse because of one bad policy or one leader. It collapsed because several risks stacked on top of each other over years. For decades, oil made up over 90% of Venezuela's export income and more than half of the government's revenue. That's like a household where one person earns almost all the money and no one else works. When oil prices were high, this seemed fine. The government spent heavily on salaries, subsidies, and imports. But when oil prices fell after 2014, the income disappeared almost overnight, while spending stayed the same. Instead of saving during good years, Venezuela expanded long-term commitments, public jobs, subsidies, pest controls, all funded by oil money. Imagine earning a big bonus one year and using it to sign permanent monthly expenses you can't cancel. When income fell, the state couldn't cut spending without social backlash, so it borrowed. And when borrowing became impossible, it printed money. Printing money feels like a solution, until it destroys trust. As the government printed more money to pay bills, prices exploded. Inflation reached millions of percentage at its worst. Salaries became worthless, savings evaporated. This is like getting paid, but prices double before you can spend your money. People stopped trusting the currency altogether. Even worse, the engine of the economy broke. Venezuela's oil company, once world-class, suffered from underinvestment and political interference. Skilled workers left and equipment failed. Oil production fell from over 3 million barrels per day to around 1 million, removing even more income from the system. Each problem made the next worse. Less oil meant less revenue. Less revenue meant weaker institutions. Weak institutions meant less investment. Less investment meant less oil. By the time reforms began, trust was already gone. The story shows that resource wealth can hide problems for years, but when it cracks, it breaks fast. This video is not about predicting collapse. No two countries feel the same way. Instead, Venezuela gives us a risk framework, warning signs that often appear before a crisis. Starting with extreme export dependence. If one product makes up more than 60 to 70% of exports, the economy is fragile. A drop in price or production can wipe out government income quickly, just like losing your only paycheck. The second is government budgets tied to that one product. When governments rely on resource income to fund wages, fuel subsidies, or social programs, cutting spending becomes politically painful. So instead of adjusting early, they delay, making the eventual correction worse. Then weak institutions. These warning signs include central banks losing independence, state-owned companies used for politics, property rights enforced unevenly. When institutions weaken, policy becomes reactive instead of preventative. Then we've got rigid controls, such as price controls, currency pegs, and capital controls that can temporarily hide problems, but they often make shortages and black markets worse over time. Then we've got capital flight, which usually happens years before visible collapse. By the time shelves empty and inflation strikes, investors have already left. The more of these signs that overlap, the smaller a country's margin for error. So let's try to apply this framework to other countries. This framework doesn't necessarily mean that these countries will collapse. It means they are operating with less room for mistakes. Starting off with Nigeria. Nigeria earns most of its export income from oil, nearly 90% in recent years. When oil prices fall, government revenue drops sharply. Currency devaluations and fuel subsidy pressure follow. Nigeria has enormous potential, but diversification remains slow, leaving the economy exposed to oil cycles. Then we've got Angola, which is even more concentrated. Oil and gas make up over 90% of exports. Debt restructuring has bought time, but public finances still move almost entirely with oil prices. The risk isn't immediate collapse, it's long-term vulnerability. Argentina is different. It isn't resource dependent in the same way, but it shares institutional fragility. Chronic inflation, capital controls, and repeated defaults have damaged trust in the currency and policy system. When people don't trust money, economies struggle to function. Iran relies heavily on oil and gas, but sanctions limit access to markets and investment. Low foreign investment and persistent inflation reduce flexibility, forcing the state to rely more on domestic financing. Then we have Sri Lanka, which shows that you don't need resources to collapse. Before its 2022 crisis, foreign reserves fell below 2 months of imports. Once the country couldn't pay for essentials, default became unavoidable. Across all these cases, the shared issue is thin shock absorbers. Venezuela's story isn't destiny. Some countries face the same risks and survive. Norway is the gold standard. It saves oil revenue in a sovereign wealth fund now worth over $1.5 trillion. The government spends only a small portion each year. When oil prices fall, life continues normally. That's the difference between spending your bonus and investing it. Countries with 6 months or more of import cover handle crises far better. Those with less than 3 months often face currency crashes and emergency bailouts. Countries with credible central banks experience much smaller inflation shocks during crisis. Trust stabilizes expectations, and expectations shape behavior. Allowing exchange rates to adjust, reforming subsidies gradually, and acting early reduces pain. No economy needs perfect diversification. Even partial diversification reduces exposure dramatically. When no single sector dominates exports, shocks hurt less. In conclusion, Venezuela collapsed not because it was unlucky, but because it ran out of options. Too much dependence, too little savings, too much rigidity. The lesson isn't about ideology, it's about structure. Countries that build buffers, protect institutions, and adjust early preserve their freedom to choose. Countries that don't gamble that good times will last forever.